Going to post on YouTube. So we've been having pretty good participation online in our classes. A lot of our winter visitors and church family that's not here anymore that moved, but they're still tuning in. So it's kind of nice to see that people are tuning in. They usually tune in the week after, like they do 1 week behind, because it takes a while to load it on Sunday mornings. So it's been kind of nice to see participation. I just feel like there's more in our Sunday school class than we physically see, so that's good. We're in 2 Chronicles 8 today, and I want to remind you that Ezra is retelling the history that we went through in Kings. We studied in Kings, but he's focusing on David and Solomon. As we get to the other kings, you're going to see he doesn't give as much detail. He doesn't say as much about the other kings. David was the man after God's own heart and was the lineage to Christ, who created a loose confederation of the 12 tribes. So he kind of had the 12 tribes together and they all had their land, but it was kind of loose. It wasn't, as connected. All the different family groups weren't as tight as they became during Solomon's time. And Solomon built the temple that David designed, and he also built a big palace and a bunch of other stuff. And he created a nation of trade and affluence. And our author does deal with that, but he really doesn't talk about the number of wives he had and the gods that he allowed to be, the altars and stuff that he allowed to be in. He kind of does a pretty quick pass through on Solomon. We're going to finish Solomon today, and we'll be getting into Rehoboam in this section. So he's reminding, the reason he's focusing on David is because he's reminding those scattered people of their heritage and their obligation to the future. So he's focusing on those tribes that from the time of David. So we're in 2 Chronicles 8, verse 1. At the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built the temple of the Lord and his own palace, Solomon rebuilt the villages that Hiram had given him and settled Israelites in them. Solomon then went to Hamath Zobah and captured it. He also built up Tadmor in the desert and all the store cities he had built in Hamath. He rebuilt Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon as fortified cities with walls and with gates and bars, as well as Baalath and all his store cities, and all the cities for his chariots and for his horses, whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all the territory he ruled. Now, I don't know about you all, but these cities by Hiram, I was trying to remember that. So I went back, it's found that story about the villages that were from Hiram. That's in 1 Kings chapter 9. We read through that story. The cities were given to Hiram by Solomon because he didn't have money for the things Hiram was going to do. And so this story doesn't mention that Hiram didn't like that idea. He didn't like the idea to accept cities for the price. Besides, they were not very great cities. So in 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 11, Hiram says, hey, you can have these cities back, and I don't want those cities. I want the money that you owe me. And so Solomon did eventually pay Hiram the money that he owed him, and the cities went back to Solomon. So in the first part where it says Solomon rebuilt the villages that Hiram had given him, well, it wasn't out of the graciousness of his heart. That wasn't a good deal. He didn't accept them, and it was kind of a conflict there. So then down at the bottom there, where it talks in verse 5, Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon as fortified cities. No, where is that? I looked on every kind of map I could find. I don't know where that is, except that it says that on a strategic road from the coastal plain. So I think it was up north of Jerusalem, up above Jerusalem there in that area. But I don't know. I couldn't find those cities on any of the maps. I did find some of the other cities that I'll be able to show you on some maps, but those, if you can find them, you can inform all of us. I couldn't find them. So 2 Chronicles 8:7. There were still people left from the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. Solomon conscripted the descendants of all these people remaining in the land, whom the Israelites had not destroyed, to serve as slave labor, as it is to this day. Now, do any of you know if when we went through the law and stuff, was there someplace that said they were allowed to conscript foreigners? Was that ever said? Was there ever a yes or a no from God about that? Because it ends up being a very big problem, and in fact a big part of why Solomon's kingdom dissolved, because of the conscripted labor. And I remember when we read in the law that they came out of Egypt, they had foreigners with them. They had Egyptians and different people with them. And as they went along, they were not supposed to intermarry with the other groups around them, but they did. So we do have foreigners in there. Do you remember ever hearing anything about whether they were allowed to conscript labor? I don't remember ever seeing anything about that. But it appears to have been displeasing to God. And maybe it was just displeasing as a practice. They seem to think it was okay because what we're reading here seems to say, well, it was okay because they weren't Jews. They were foreigners. But I don't really know that that was okay. And it does turn out to be kind of the big downfall in Solomon's reign at the end. Part of why it kind of all dissolves, we'll see in this next few chapters.
I mean, I know that God's not okay with us being unequally yoked. I know that that's a thing.
Yeah.
And that could have something to do with it.
Being married to someone. And, I don't know. I want to keep an eye out as we go through the scripture. If I see something that says you're not supposed to conscript labor, I want to see that. Verse 9. But Solomon did not make slaves of the Israelites for his work. They were his fighting men, commanders of his captains, and commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also King Solomon's chief officials, 250 officials supervising the men. Hey, Eve, I just felt the air kick on too. See, you're welcome. Please come in.
Yeah, this could have helped in recent day, or relatively recent times, Hitler to justify his use of labor from citizenry of nations he captured.
Yeah.
We're Americans.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we got our own history.
Well, we know that conscription is not a God thing. In other words, God didn't say, I don't know anywhere that says don't, but I don't recall ever seeing anything where God says go ahead and conscript, have slave labor. I don't see that anywhere.
It talks about the relationship between slave and master, but it doesn't say that God's necessarily okay with that arrangement in the first place. It's just if that is the arrangement,
right,
then there needs to be a certain relationship held.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I see it too. But I want to keep an eye open. You know how when we go through scripture, you don't notice something, and then if you keep your eye out, keep in the back of your mind. If you notice something that says something, then bring it to our attention. It ends up being the downfall of Solomon's setup. That tends to be the big conflict. Verse 11. Solomon brought Pharaoh's daughter up from the city of David to the palace he had built for her. He said, "My wife must not live in the palace of David, king of Israel, because the places the ark of the Lord has entered are holy."
Oh. Okay.
Both First Kings and Chronicles record the transfer of Pharaoh's daughter to special quarters, but only Chronicles adds the reason. So not only the temple, but also David's palace was regarded as holy because of the presence of the ark nearby. That's in, there's a note on that in Leviticus 11. As an idol worshiper, the Pharaoh's daughter could not live in this sacred place.
That's understandable.
Yeah, well, I put in big parentheses, okay, to marry her, but don't let her near the ark.
Yeah, I'm sure that made her feel good. That she wasn't good enough.
It just seems really duplicitous,
But maybe she
You
was
can marry
pretty.
her, but don't let her near the ark.
Pretty.
Well,
That might have been part of it.
he had
I had money.
he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, so I don't know. Anyway, I just thought that was very revealing of the way Solomon was acting, almost like he's so holy. I'm trying to do things right, like building the tabernacle and all that, but at the same time,
And he's really trying not to defile this holy place here.
Yes. And when we get to the end of this conversation, we're going to talk about some of this, but this just makes me think of how we are today, where we say that we are Christians and that we are godly people, but we allow certain things in our life that don't belong. And then they cause us difficulty down the road.